Myst, Might, Mayhem. By Han Jung-Leolya. Chapter 357. Sacred Orb. Part 1. Bizarre monsters breaking through the bottom of the precipice. They had a form reminiscent of earthworms, but what was different was that on the part that seemed to be the head, there were dozens of black eyes along with countless sharp teeth that were difficult to count, from the outside to the inside of a round mouth. Quang. Quack-quack-quack-wang. Although described as earthworm-like in form, their thickness was much thicker than a human's torso, and their length appeared to be at least 6 to 8 jang. Moreover, these monsters that suddenly sprang out were not single entities. There seemed to be dozens of them. What on earth are those? As Mok Jiangan frowned, Chang Ryang's voice rang in his ears. They're Earth Mole dragons. Earth Mole dragons? Earth Mole dragon is another name for earthworms. Because he dealt with medicinal ingredients, his grandfather also called earthworms Earth Mole dragons. Of course, that wasn't the important thing right now. They don't seem to have strong spiritual power. Even so, they're probably at the level of monstrous beasts. Although most evil spirits and monsters are like that, I've heard Earth Mole dragons extremely dislike light and only live deep underground. A precipice this deep seems like a perfect place where light doesn't enter well. That's true. But the reason those things are rampaging like that is probably because of that, right? Huh? What do you mean? At her words, Mok Jiangan looked at the sacred orb. He could understand why Chang Ryang had such a reaction. He saw that cracks were forming in the brightly shining sacred orb. Cracks? Come to think of it, the light of the sacred orb had weakened considerably. That's why the cracked parts were clearly visible, but, he wondered why it had cracked, but he understood the reason. There were very small blade marks on the sacred orb. He had tried his best to keep the blade aura from touching the sacred orb while fighting with the blade user, but it seems some of that sharp energy had touched it after all. Mok Jiangan looked at the sacred orb as if troubled. If the sacred orb breaks and shatters, it would mean their efforts in coming here were in vain. For now. Kwa Waya. It was at that moment. The earth mole dragons that had broken through the ground and were thrashing about soared upwards with monstrous cries. About a dozen stretched up simultaneously, and what they were aiming for was none other than me. 2 or 3 of the earth mole dragons stretched towards the blade user, but most of these numerous creatures were stretching towards Mok Jiangan. Judging by their roaring with monstrous cries, they seemed enraged. Wasn't disliking supposed to mean avoiding? They really hated light. No, it was at the level of extreme hatred. Perhaps because of this, they all aimed at him as if desperate to quickly eliminate the light of the sacred orb. Woo-woo. At this, Mok Jiangan raised his demonic energy and unleashed black sword energy. Unlike in the past, now these evil spirits and monsters at the level of monstrous beasts were not something he couldn't handle no matter how many there were. After raising sword energy like this, he aimed his sword at the stretching earth mole dragons, pulling it back. It was at that moment. Wururururuck. Along with a heat so intense it felt scorching, a huge flame blazed up. Puzzled by this, he looked in that direction and saw that the blade user's entire body was covered in a blazing huge flame. His body is enveloped in flames? What kind of sorcery is this? As he was wondering about this, the blade user shouted as if for Mok Jiangan to hear, "Watch closely, Qianma. This is my true power." With that shout, the blade user unleashed an ultimate technique made of flames towards the earth mole dragons rushing towards him. 4th technique, Blade Extreme Wave Force, Fire. Weruruk. Quack-quack-quack-quack-quack-quasha. Blade energy imbued with flames crashed down on the earth mole dragons like a huge tidal wave. For the earth mole dragons, flames were truly their antithesis. As the flaming blade energy mercilessly cut through the bodies of the earth mole dragons, they screamed bizarre cries as they burned in the fire energy. Kukakakakakas. The momentum of the blade technique imbued with fire energy was so strong that the earth mole dragons were helplessly overwhelmed. But then, a coincidental event occurred. Kuioio. Quaquaquaquas. The many earth mole dragons that had been rushing towards Mok Jiangan because of the sacred orb's light all suddenly changed direction towards the blade user. Not only that, but even the earth mole dragons that had still been on the ground also soared upwards. No. This wasn't intentional. However, coincidentally, the blazing flames emitted an even stronger light than the sacred orb, and this was enough to stimulate the earth mole dragons. He could easily handle 2 or 3, but when this many earth mole dragons entangled and surged like a wave, even the blade user would have trouble dealing with all of them. Pack. Oh no. Individually, they weren't evil spirits and monsters that were difficult to handle. But not only were there many of them, their pushing force and momentum as they entangled and surged was tremendous. As a result, the blade user, who had been wielding flaming blade energy, was unable to withstand their surging momentum and ended up being swept away by the group of earth mole dragons. Pack. Mok Jiangan, who was hanging by sticking his sword into the wall, smiled slightly as he watched the scene. If he hadn't raised fire energy saying he would use his full power, this wouldn't have happened. Should one say he's unlucky? It was truly a case of self-entrapment. Mok Jiangan looked down. He could see the ground at the end of the precipice. Thinking he couldn't keep hanging on the cliff wall forever, Mok Jiangan decided he should go down, so he pulled out his sword and launched his body downwards. As it was only about 20 zhang, he slowly descended while controlling air resistance with true qi, tack, and landed on the ground. After coming down to the ground like this, the ground wriggled and the few remaining earth mole dragons revealed themselves. Most of the individuals had rushed to the blade user, and the few remaining ones seemed to be young earth mole dragons that hadn't fully grown yet. At this, Mok Jiangan was about to raise strong energy to deal with them, but quiet. Even if they were not fully grown earth mole dragons, they were still much larger and longer than humans, so they were equally threatening. The earth mole dragons rushed towards Mok Jiangan with monstrous cries. But the earth mole dragons approaching nearby suddenly started trembling. Mok Jiangan's eyes glinted with interest as he was gauging the distance. Why are they suddenly acting like this? As he was wondering, the earth mole dragons suddenly lowered their bodies and began to retreat, crawling on the ground. What's going on? They're afraid. You say they're afraid? Don't you know why? At Chang Ryang's words, Mok Jiangan suddenly pulled out an accessory he was wearing at his waist. As he pulled this out, the earth mole dragons that had been flinching and retreating gave up even being wary and completely turned their bodies, digging into the ground. Querurururu. Seeing their behavior, Mok Jiangan looked at the accessory. This was an accessory that the white-faced king, the golden-furred nine-tailed fox, had made for him using the fur from its cut tail. She had said that with this, he wouldn't have to deal with most evil spirits and monsters, and it seems that wasn't just empty talk. Lu, the demonic beast trapped in Shaolin's demon-subduing cave, perhaps because it was of high rank and possessed intelligence, tried to use the golden-furred nine-tailed fox's spiritual power while fearing it. But the earth mole dragons, perhaps because they were low-ranking monstrous beasts, seemed rather true to their instincts. It's quite useful. Well, I suppose so. Watching them escape into the ground, Mok Jiangan put his precious sword Evil Commandment sword back into its scabbard. Chuck. Chang Ryang then said to him. But how did you enter that state of deep concentration earlier? Could it be because of that sacred orb? At her question, Mok Jiangan pulled out a Woonsung severed hand that was stuck on plundering killing sword. The sacred orb that the severed hand was grasping had cracks in it. It seemed like it might break at any moment if handled carelessly. I'm not sure. I suddenly entered the mind's eye state. Suddenly, you say? Yes. That's strange. I don't understand how you entered that state of deep concentration when you're not the chosen one that old woman or that girl mortal talked about. So what did you see? Yes. What did you see? A possible distant future. A possible distant future? Then you say you saw revelations, no, future events? I don't know. Since it's a future that might happen. If it's the future, what happened? She asked out of curiosity. At this, Mok Jaeyonan shrugged and answered. I'm not sure. It doesn't seem like I saw what I really wanted to see, and it seems to have shown too distant a future, so it seems useless. You say it seems useless? Yes. Well, not all of it. Mok Jaeyonan couldn't forget that scene he saw at the end. It brought a shock close to ecstasy. Seeing that one thing alone was enough. Then Chang Ryong said, I don't know how you came to see such things, but it seems you need that girl mortal's power to see what you really want. That's true, but the state of the sacred orb wasn't very good. It had cracks and seemed like it might break if handled even slightly wrong. Moreover, the energy flowing out of the sacred orb along with the bright light was gradually weakening. Looking at its state, it seemed like it would soon lose its power as an object. For now, mortal, hide that. No, I'll manifest and take that up the cliff. You, Chang Ryong? Yes. Look at where the earth mole dragons are. How long do you think they can hold out? Kugugugugu. Red fire energy was flowing out from between the entangled monstrous earth mole dragons. Although he was swept away because there were so many, the blade user would soon break out of there. I don't know what that monster-like mortal's identity is, but it seems he has consumed the true sources of beings called spirit beasts. Spirit beasts? Suddenly, Mok Jaeyonan recalled what Dam Baekwa, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, had said and what he had seen in the Book of Mountains and Sea Strange Beasts. Unlike evil spirits and monsters born from the gathering of Yin energy, spirit beasts were beings formed by the gathering of natural energy and pure spiritual power. A typical example is the dragon, which has been called the most sacred being since ancient times. Ah. Why do you say that? It seems to be that person. That person? The peerless expert who appeared on that day of great calamity and used strange blade techniques. Dam Baekwa, the blood saint of the Nine Blood sect, had faced the rampaging spirit beast dragon turtle, and in the process, a blade expert of unknown identity appeared and finished off the weakened dragon turtle, taking its true source. Dam Baekwa, who had consumed just a little of the spirit beast's blood, didn't age and gained lightning energy. I see. That guy could indeed be the one that woman from the Nine Blood sect mentioned. From lightning energy to incredible regenerative power. These weren't abilities that an ordinary human could possess. Surely, that person must have absorbed the dragon turtle's true source. No, it might not be just one. Seeing that he handles fire energy in addition to lightning energy, he must have obtained the true source of another spirit beast as well. Probably the Fire Qilin. Fire Qilin. That too is a legendary spirit beast. This being, said to have been born in hot lava, is also called the incarnation of flames. Come to think of it, 10,000 men commander So Yurin said that on the day of great calamity, a fire Qilin appeared in the imperial capital of Kaifeng and turned the place into a wasteland. Just how many true sources has he eaten? Although he had seen the years he had lived and possible future events through the sacred orb, he was still a being full of questions. Kwajik. Werereru. At that moment, someone sprang up as flame soared from among the earth mole dragons. It was the blade user. He thought he wouldn't last long, but he had managed to break out from there. Kwaduk. At that moment, Chang Ryong broke the wooden puppet and manifested. She, who had come out after a long time, reached out her hand to Mok Jaeyonan. It's about time. If you fight with that, it will surely break. Hand it over to me. I suppose we should. Thinking her words were right, Mok Jaeyonan then carefully tried to open the fingers of the severed wrist stuck on the precious sword plundering killing sword to take out the sacred orb. It was the moment his hand touched the cracked sacred orb like this. Mok Jaeyonan frowned. The world changed to a state of nothingness again. In an instant, he had fallen into deep concentration again and entered the world of the mind's eye. There's no time for this. Mok Jaeyonan focused his mind and tried to escape from the state of deep concentration. But at that moment, a strange thing happened before his eyes. Black flames began to blaze in the space where there had been nothing. Why is this phenomenon of flames burning black, not reddish or scarlet? As he was wondering about this strangeness, the black flame suddenly began to swirl. Wee! As it swirled like this, the flames gradually gathered in one place. Then eventually, the gathered black flames began to take on a form, and it took on a human shape. Mok Jayangun's eyes glinted with interest as he watched this. This was because the appearance of the being that had taken on a human form was none other than himself. What is this now? Why is his own appearance suddenly visible? As he was wondering, the being created from the gathered black flames that had taken on his appearance suddenly approached. What's going on? Is this just a simple illusion? Unlike when he entered the mind's eye earlier, this being born from black flames and having the same appearance as himself seemed to be aware of him. Then this being opened its mouth. So that appearance is the result of your choice. Are you talking to me? Yes. Who else do you think I'm talking to? At these words from the being, Mok Jayangun's eyes were instantly filled with wariness. He had thought it was different from a simple illusion, and it really was recognizing him and speaking. At this reaction from Mok Jayangun, the being with the same appearance as him smiled slightly and said, "Interesting. Although the result can't be helped, for something you desired so much, it's quite an imperfect appearance. Or is it because you've become an imperfect being? What on earth are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your choice, no, our choice." Our? Mok Jayangun's mind became confused by this being's words. He couldn't understand at all what it was saying. "What do you mean by our?" To that question, the being approached and said, "Well, isn't that a question you should ask your closed self?" "My closed self?" "Yes. The fact that you closed yourself is ultimately your own choice. It doesn't seem to be an area I should interfere with. You've been talking about choice this and that, but what on earth are you saying? If you know something, can't you explain it properly? Even if you closed yourself, you are also me." "Of course, I could answer your questions, but there's no time for that." "What do you mean by that?" "The cracks are spreading rapidly. The fragment will soon disappear." "By fragment, does it mean the sacred orb?" Then the being walked right up to him and said, "Hurry. Already nearly half the energy has been lost due to the cracks." "What on earth?" "Tack." At that moment, the being reached out its hand towards Mok Jayangun. At this, Mok Jayangun tried to move his body to avoid it, but he couldn't move as if something was restraining him. In the meantime, the being placed its palm in the center of Mok Jayangun's chest. Weruruk. At that moment, the being resembling himself was enveloped in black flames. What on earth is it trying to do? As he was wondering, the being smiled and said in a meaningful voice, "I am a fragment of the core. Just a piece of you." Chapter 358. Sacred Orb. Part 2. Mortal? Don't tell me it's you again? Chong Ryong, who had been reaching out her hand asking for the cracked sacred orb, clicked her tongue in disbelief. The moment he touched the sacred orb, his eyes glazed over. He had clearly fallen into the mind's eye state. She couldn't understand what mysterious power the sacred orb possessed for someone with not weak willpower to keep falling into a state of deep concentration like this. Normally it wouldn't matter, but there was no time for this now. Chong Ryong, having manifested to wake Mok Jayangun, was about to reach out her hand. This expression is new again. It was a face rarely seen on him. Chong Ryong, who had been staring at the dazed-eyed Mok Jayangun, shook her head and hurriedly tried to wake him. But at that very moment, Weruruk. Suddenly, flames flickered and blazed from Mok Jayangun's hand holding the sacred orb. Seeing this, Chong Ryong's eyes widened. It wasn't ordinary flames. The flames were so black as to be reminiscent of an abyss. Seeing this, her face was filled with shock. Black fire? This? What on earth? Weruruk. At that moment, the black flames that had blazed up from the hand holding the sacred orb tried to spread over his entire body. But then the black flames that were about to spread suddenly subsided. Then they disappeared as if they had never been there. The flames had only appeared for a very brief moment. What? What on earth was this just now? I am a fragment of the core. Just a piece of you. A fragment of the core? What does this mean? As he was wondering, the flames enveloping the being resembling himself began to transfer to his body through its two hands. At this incredibly strange phenomenon, Mok Jayangan tried to move his body but couldn't budge at all. Rather, the moment the black flames touched him, he was caught in a strange sensation. It felt like an endless abyss and darkness, and despite being flames, it wasn't hot but terribly cold. But what was even stranger was that this sensation didn't feel like it was the first time. The moment the flames spread over his body, he felt something vaguely familiar yet nostalgic. Weraruk. As the black flames spread over his entire body like that, something welled up inside along with a sense of elation. Just as he was about to fully savor these black flames. Sook. Someone placed a hand on his shoulder. I'll hold on to this for now. Weraruk. Then the black flames that had been spreading over his entire body began to gather towards his shoulder. Then the black flames disappeared as if completely burned away. Wondering what on earth had happened, the being with the same appearance that had placed its hand on Mok Jayangan's shoulder furrowed its brow and spoke. You? Did you exist? I did. A familiar voice. No, rather than familiar, it was the same voice. Mok Jayangan tried to somehow turn his head at the voice that was no different from the being resembling himself. But he couldn't move as if his body was restrained. Then, I'm sorry, but it's not time yet. What? No. Even without this, your potential surpasses mine. What are you saying? Everything depends on how you think about it. In the end, it's up to your will to do it. Who on earth are you? Well, you'll know everything soon enough. Sook. With those words, the being with the voice removed its hand from Mok Jayangan's shoulder. Then Mok Jayangan lost consciousness. Sururururu. The unconscious Mok Jayangan's form disappeared as if scattering. As Mok Jayangan disappeared like that, the one beside him stepped forward, and its appearance was no different from Mok Jayangan. No, it was him itself. Watching this, the being that had called itself a fragment of the core spoke. An incomprehensible choice. Did you even separate your personality? Let's say that's the case. Isn't it an unnecessary choice? It was a necessary choice. Was it a choice made because you couldn't bear it? I see. But why did you stop him from taking the energy remaining in the fragment? Wasn't this a contingency plan for that very purpose? To the being's question, the one with Mok Jayangan's appearance shook its head. The time hasn't come yet. It's too early to handle this yet. To say it's too early, he's become incredibly strong despite being an incomplete being. It's not enough. If he takes the fragment's energy and reveals that in an unprepared state, even those beyond will notice. Dash. At those words, the eyes of the being calling itself a fragment of the core glinted with interest. Then, as if finally understanding, it spoke. I see. So that's why you stopped it? Yes. But now I understand. What do you mean? I wondered why you were doing such unnecessary things, but it wasn't just a choice made because you couldn't bear it. It was all out of necessity. As soon as those words ended, the body of the being calling itself a fragment of the core began to scatter. To it, the one who was Mok Jayangan himself put his hands together and made a respectful fist palm salute. What's that? This is how one shows respect here. Respect. That's a good word. I feel light now that I've finished my task, and even my mood has improved. Is this what they call the meaning of existence? With those words, the scattering being smiled. And that smile disappeared into the scattering. Pasusususu. At that moment, the cracked sacred orb shattered and crumbled like sand. Huh? Mok Jayangan, coming to his senses, frowned at this sight. He hadn't expected the sacred orb to completely crumble. Mok Jayanun's mind became complicated as he watched this. The events experienced in the mind's eye were even harder to define than what he had seen before. What on earth was the fragment of the core, and who was that being that suddenly appeared? Who on earth are you? Well, you'll know everything soon enough. That tone. Although it didn't show its face, he remembered. It was certainly that being that had occupied his body. He could be sure because he remembered exactly that sensation from then and that tone of speech. Just what is that being inside me? It certainly existed, but after briefly meeting it in the mind's eye, his mind became even more complicated. Then, mortal, you. What was that just now? Chongrayong suddenly thrust her face close and asked. At this, Mok Jayanun asked back, puzzled. What do you mean, what was that? The black fire. Black fire? Yes. That was certainly that. That? That. You. No. No. That's definitely not it. What on earth are you? Mortal. If you ask like that, I don't know how to answer you. Just now, your body was covered in black flames. Of course, they went out instantly as soon as they appeared, but... You say they went out instantly? Yes. What on earth happened? If you're asking about something because of black flames, I don't know either. The things that happened in the mind's eye have become even harder to explain than before. At these words from Mok Jayanun, Chongrayong bit her lip hard. Then she let out a long sigh. To her, Mok Jayanun spoke with sharpened eyes. For now, it seems better to talk about the black flames later. At these words, Chongrayong looked where Mok Jayanun was looking. There, she saw the blade user, his entire body covered in the green blood of the earth mole dragons, approaching with a terrifying momentum. Mok Jayanun handed her the powder of the shattered sacred orb. Although it had lost its form, it seemed they should still keep it for now. Can you handle him alone? I'll have to try. From the point of consuming more than 2 true sources, that guy can hardly be considered human anymore. Yes. He's literally a being close to immortality. We'll see. Let's test it. Test? How to kill him, that is. Pat. As soon as those words ended, Mok Jayanun also launched his body towards the blade user approaching him. The morale and fighting spirit of the blade user who had massacred the monstrous earth mole dragons had reached its peak. That momentum had greatly increased, and Wereruruk. His treasured blade rippled with flames, looking as if it would spew them out at any moment. Let's end this here. Kianma. Chwa 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 chwa. Third technique, Blade Extreme Net Purity. The blade user's treasured blade, covered in flames, rushed towards Mok Jayanun, tracing strange trajectories that could never come from ordinary blade techniques. Mok Jayanun calmly observed this, and chwa 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 chwa. The blade technique then spread out, growing like a large net and densely filling the surroundings. Its range was incredibly vast, reaching up to 8 zhang. It was literally a net of flaming blades, leaving no place to escape. Surung. Although he might have been slightly overwhelmed by the tremendous momentum of the blade technique, Mok Jayanun drew his precious sword Evil Commandment sword without the slightest change in expression. After drawing a sword like that, Mok Jayanun immediately traced the blade from bottom to top with his left sword finger. Then, Swaeowa. At that moment, the sword began to emit an extreme cold energy. The cold energy that flowed out like that merged with demonic energy and turned into a black cold wave. He handles cold energy? The blade user inwardly clicked his tongue at this sight. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the fire energy obtained from consuming the fire Qilin's true source possessed the greatest destructive power among spirit beasts. He had intended to gain the upper hand in one breath by imbuing this fire energy, but he hadn't expected that guy, who hadn't even consumed a true source, to be able to handle cold energy, which could be called its antithesis. But that energy isn't obtained from a true source, so it must be just a temporary power. Wereruruk. In the end, when they clashed, it would be advantageous for him. Like that, the flaming blade technique and the sword technique imbued with cold energy were about to clash. Cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-cha-chang. The sword technique Mok Jiangan unleashed was the first technique of the demonic sword art. There was no need to block over a wide range. Since the entire net made of blades wasn't attacking him anyway, it was enough to just protect himself. Chi-chi-cheki-chi-chin. The fiercely clashing fire energy and cold energy soon created misty steam, as befitting energies of opposing natures. As steam rose, the surrounding visibility was suddenly obscured. The expression of the blade user clashing techniques became strange. What's going on? He was clearly pushing with an overwhelming offensive by drawing up even the power of the true source, but the other wasn't being pushed back at all. Rather, the energy seemed to have become stronger than before. What on earth is this? Has his inner force increased? No. That couldn't be. How could inner force increase this much in such a short time? This was impossible. Chi-chi-cheki-chin. The blade user's eyes narrowed as he clashed blades. He wondered if he was mistaken because of the steam, but something like steam was also rising from Mok Jiangan's entire body. Moreover, his face was flushed red. Shoo! Could it be that his techniques have gained more momentum because of this? Whatever technique this was, temporarily raising energy like this would become disadvantageous as time passed. And chi-chi-chi-ching. Chang. The blade user, who had been unleashing blade techniques, suddenly initiated a change in technique, twisting his waist and rotating his blade. At that moment, a whirlwind of flames arose centered on him. Sixth technique, revolving dragon ascending to heaven. It was an ultimate technique that created a whirlwind with blade energy to narrow in and pressure the opponent. But at that instant, tatak. Mok Jiangan's form split into two. He had divided his form using the wind god step. Then, one of the divided forms of Mok Jiangan, Kung, stepped firmly and pulled his sword towards the whirlwind of flames created by the blade user, then thrust it forward. Then, kwa 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 kwa. From the tip of the sword, a cold black whirlwind arose and surged towards the whirlwind created by the blade user. This was none other than the pursuing swirling sword. Chi-chi-cheki-chi-chin. The whirlwinds of flames and cold black energy created by the two peerless experts clashed fiercely. Their power was indeed evenly matched. But there was one human figure flying into the center of those whirlwinds. It was the doppelganger of Mok Jiangan, divided using the Wind Shadow Two Forms technique of the Wind God Step. Humchit. The blade user instinctively realized what Mok Jiangan was trying to do. It was certainly that single sword strike that concentrated all power into one point. At this, the blade user's gaze sharpened. That must be your ultimate strike. But even that sword isn't without weakness. When all power is concentrated into one point, the force becomes so strong that it cannot be stopped midway. Anyone who has experienced or suffered from this even once would find this single weakness. If one could change direction midway with this technique, that weakness could be compensated for, but no matter how you look at it, this is a strike that surpasses limits. It's not something that can possibly be stopped. If that's the case, quack. The blade user gripped his blade handle tightly while unleashing revolving dragon ascending to heaven. Chwack. At that moment, a black line appeared in the center of the whirlwind. It was at that very instant. Thanks to the whirlwind, the target was gathered into just one point, so the blade user was certain that this concentration of power would aim for only one spot and moved exactly half a step. Pack. And in that state of moving half a step to the side, chwack. He unleashed the fifth technique, Extreme Swift Killing Blade. There's absolutely no way to avoid it. You'll have to take the full brunt of that power concentrated into one point along with my blade strike, Pagagagakak. At that moment, the blade user's eyes shook. That was because he stopped? Mok Jiangan had stopped midway through unleashing his single strike with concentrated power. Because of this, the ground split and fragments soared upwards. But this wasn't the end. When concentrating power like this, the force becomes so strong that only thrusting is possible, so if this single strike is forcibly stopped like this, wuduk. The only thing that had to withstand that aftermath was his own body. Chapter 359. Sacred Orb. Part 3. The technique of focusing all his strength into a single point was, for Mok Jianyun, a method that surpassed his own realm and physical limitations. As such, when forcibly halting this concentrated power, the backlash would inevitably affect himself. Crack. Crackle. The sound of muscles tearing and ripping throughout his body echoed. It was loud enough for even the blade user a few steps away to hear. The blade user, who had been momentarily amazed at the halting of the sword draw, soon curved his lips into a sinister smile. Stopping this one sword strike was indeed an excellent judgment. But it was also a foolish choice. Thanks to enduring that tremendous backlash, not only was he in pain, but it would be difficult for him to move right now. In a battle between martial artists of nearly equal skill, this was a fatal miscalculation. Whoosh! The blade user moved. As someone whose entire body's muscles had developed to maximize any movement, he could achieve ultra-high-speed movement with just basic body techniques. Swish! The blade user's form scattered and instantly reached Mok Jianyun's front. He unleashed his sword technique towards Mok Jianyun's vital points. Second form, Sword Extreme Form Control. There was no need to even use fire energy. A situation where he could finish it with just sword techniques. Whoosh! At that moment, Mok Jianyun threw his body backward. Seeing this, a strange light flickered in the blade user's eyes. He moved. Most of his muscles should have been torn, yet he endured the pain and forced himself to move. It was an admirable level of endurance, enough to make one's tongue click in amazement. He must have also sustained internal injuries, making it difficult to utilize his inner energy. It was impressive that he could show such movement in this state. But the world of combat is cold. No matter how admirable or worthy of respect an opponent might be, he had to die. Swish! Whoosh! The blade user changed his sword technique, altering the trajectory to catch up with Mok Jianyun as he threw his body backward. It wasn't something he could avoid just by dodging anyway. Unless he had superhuman regenerative abilities like himself, who had absorbed the essence of spiritual beasts, his body wouldn't recover just by briefly avoiding attacks. Just give up already. The trajectories of the blade user's sword techniques aimed to slice off Mok Jianyun's arms. At that moment, hisses. The skin below Mok Jianyun's head, which had been glowing red and emitting steam due to blood flow, suddenly began to turn black, with veins bulging prominently. This was the evil blood shifting technique. But it didn't end there. Crack! Crack! In this state of evil blood shifting, the muscles near Mok Jianyun's joints swelled, filling in the torn areas. Clang 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 clang. Along with this, Mok Jianyun unleashed a sword-drawing technique of the demonic sword art, blocking the blade user's changed technique. The blade user was dumbfounded. What kind of technique is this? He displayed some bizarre techniques, gathering his power into a single point and then filling in the aftermath of stopping it. Flutter flutter flutter. Whatever techniques they were, his strength had returned to a comparable level. Thinking it was only temporary, the blade user unleashed a series of other sword techniques to subdue Mok Jianyun. Clang 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 clang. In an instant, the two exchanged about 10 forms. Despite this, Mok Jianyun didn't give an inch and received his sword techniques. When the blade user used techniques that exceeded the normal range of joint movement, Mok Jianyun countered with completely different sword-drawing techniques using both hands. Thus, no openings were created. Whoosh! Realizing this wouldn't work, the blade user infused his sword techniques with fire energy to push Mok Jianyun back forcefully, but in response, Mok Jianyun raised cold energy, creating a situation similar to before. The surroundings became hazy with steam. Clang 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 clang. As visibility decreased and they had to rely on sound and energy sense to judge movements, the blade user's eyes grew complex. How many techniques has he mastered to be able to endure like this? It was impressive enough that he was still holding out when his energy should be depleting over time, but he was also filling in his deficiencies with these strange techniques he had learned. Gore. He prided himself on having perfected the ultimate essence of sword techniques, compensating for all the weaknesses while competing with the brilliant genius known as the Sword Demon. Moreover, hadn't he surpassed human limits in inner energy by obtaining 2 spiritual beast cores? Yet why was he maintaining this stalemate? Is this the beginning? As much as he hated to admit it, he was truly a naturally gifted martial talent of unprecedented caliber. There was a reason he was called a legend. Clang 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 clang. They had already exchanged over 40 forms, yet he showed not even the slightest opening, making the blade user want to genuinely express his admiration. But he hadn't come all this way just to admire and compete. His ultimate goal was to take his life. I wanted to defeat him purely through martial skill, but I guess that was just my own desire. Thud. At that moment, Mok Jiangnun's magic sword Evil Commandment sword pierced the blade user's abdomen. This is? In an instant, Mok Jiangnun's eyes narrowed. Even with the steam obscuring vision and weakening concentration, that last sword strike wasn't something this man should have fallen for. Right then. Grab. The blade user grabbed the sword embedded in him. Then. Slash. Mok Jiangnun instantly let go of Evil Commandment sword's hilt and tried to avoid it using the clear manifest water leaping step, but his shoulder was still cut. So this was it? As his shoulder was sliced, Mok Jiangnun realized. As the stalemate continued and he became more accustomed to the sword techniques, the blade user had switched to an extreme strategy. That strategy was to unleash techniques aiming for mutual destruction with every move. By attacking with the intent of dying together, it naturally became possible to sacrifice flesh to gain bone. So you've resorted to this. Mok Jiangnun had anticipated this strategy to some extent. It was a rational choice. Even he would have employed such a strategy to face an equal or stronger opponent if he had such tremendous regenerative abilities that could regrow severed limbs. Now I need to create distance. If they fought at close range, he would continue to use techniques of mutual destruction. For someone like himself without superhuman regeneration, this approach would only put him at a disadvantage. Just as Mok Jiangnun was about to create distance, clang. The blade user pulled out the magic sword Evil Commandment sword embedded in his abdomen and threw it away, uttering incomprehensible words. Steam is moisture. Do you know what has a good affinity with moisture? At that very moment. Crackle 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 crackle. Suddenly, the hazy surroundings full of steam were enveloped in blue lightning. It was the lightning energy emitted by the blade user. As the space filled with steam was dyed with lightning, the entire area became like a thundercloud. Zap. Zap. In the space instantly filled with lightning, Mok Jiangnun was electrocuted. It wasn't something he could avoid. He tried to protect his entire body with demonic energy to disperse the lightning energy, but he couldn't do anything about the muscle stiffening caused by the continuous lightning. As his movement slowed down at that moment. It's over. Whoosh. The blade user unleashed his extreme swift killing blade to behead Mok Jiangnun. Unlike the electrocuted and stiffened Mok Jiangnun, the blade user's blade, moving freely and even faster in the lightning, was truly the epitome of extreme swiftness. Slash. It was an all-too-fatal strike. Facing the extremely swift blade aiming for his neck, Mok Jiangnun instantly sensed death. I can't avoid it. No matter how much he struggled, this was something he couldn't do anything about in his current state. The moment he realized this, time seemed to slow down. It was truly bizarre. Whoosh 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 whoosh. To think that the extremely swift blade would appear so slow when he thought he was going to die. They say humans see their entire life flash before their eyes before death. It might be a process of looking back on the years they've lived. However, for Mok Jiangnun, who didn't place much significance on the years he had lived, death was just an end. Because he thought it was just an end. Is this as far as I go? As he was about to accept this, suddenly, mortal. A single existence flashed through Mok Jayangan's mind. It was none other than Chang Ryong. Why? Why did she come to mind right before death? Not his grandfather, not regret for not fully completing his revenge. Why did her voice and face come to mind? In that instant, Mok Jayangan wondered. Her face came to mind so naturally, and he even felt a strange emotion of wanting to see her just one more time. This was a first in his life. As the feeling of wanting to see her grew stronger, a different emotion from acceptance arose in Mok Jayangan's mind. Not yet. It was the feeling that he had to live to see her. But how could he survive this moment? His body was stiff from the lightning, and the extremely swift blade was just a hair's breadth away from his neck. Was there really a way to escape from a situation like this? As he was filled with doubt, suddenly, everything depends on how you think about it. In the end, it's all about your will to do it. The words that being had said in his mental image suddenly came to mind. At that moment, on the border between life and death, Mok Jayangan's eyes came alive and his senses became extremely sharp. Thud. Ugh. At that moment, a death cry burst from the blade user's mouth. The blade user's eyes shook wildly. For good reason, as he was just about to behead him, but something sharp had pierced right through his heart in the middle of his chest. What is this? It was clearly a sword, seemingly non-existent yet existing. The blade user looked down. There, a sharp blade was forming the shape of a sword without any medium, and this was invincible sword? There was no doubt. Beyond the stage of becoming one with the sword, where even energy forms a sword. It was the realm of the invincible sword. The blade user staggered with an unbelieving expression. How could he, who had taken 2 spiritual beast cores and surpassed wall after wall to reach the realm of oneness with the blade, not yet reach this supreme realm? Shudder. For a moment, the blade user's expression froze. It was because he met Mok Jayangan's eyes looking at him. The emotion he felt the moment he saw those eyes was singular. Death. Mok Jayangan's eyes were depicting only his death. Sensing this, the blade user's mind was filled with fear and terror. At that moment, Mok Jayangan's form, free from the lightning, moved. At this, the blade user's hand, staggering from having his heart pierced by the formless sword, reached for the pouch at his waist. I must escape. Slash. At that moment, a black line appeared and passed through the blade user. Thud. Mok Jayangan appeared at the end of the black line, exhaling rough breaths. Ha. Ha. Thump. Then, the staggering blade user behind him fell to his knees on the ground. At that sound, Mok Jayangan slowly turned his head. There was the blade user, with a hole larger than a fist in the back of his head, through which the opposite side was clearly visible.